Hi everyone, it's Mike at BrashMonkey again, and as promised, here is a tutorial video for how I made the rotating coin animation. So the very first thing you need to do is make sure when you create your images, and of course these are exported out as 4 separate images, make sure they match up very well with each other, meaning they are all centered images, they are all exactly the same height, with the top uh, pixels lined up exactly the same with each other, as well as the bottom pixels, and especially important with the 2 images that represent the sort of side view or depth of the coin. Make sure that whatever pattern, like the ribbing that I've made here, is lined up exactly the same between these 2 images. Once you've created your images and you export them all separately, make sure they're all centered horizontally and vertically in the image canvas, and make sure, for example, if there's 4 or 5 transparent pixels above and below each image, make sure it's the same in all of the other corresponding images. And once that's done, you're ready to go into Spriter and start a new animation. Before you get started dragging images onto your canvas, obviously make sure you're at timeline 0 for your new animation. You can, if you're somewhere you don't want to be, you can of course click and drag like this, or you can click here and type in 0 and press enter, and it'll bring you to your 0 point on the timeline. But the other thing you need to do is quickly double click on each image in the file palette and make sure you're set to 0.5 for both the X pivot and Y pivot of the default pivot point. That way all of your images you can place at 0, 0 to start with, and you'll know they'll all be perfectly lined up with each other. When I'm about to create an animation that's more sort of mechanical than organic, what I like to do is give the actual animation some thought before I get started to figure out the best approach. So in this case, let's start with the most basic form of a rotating object. Let's imagine that this coin were paper thin. If that were the case, we would only need to use one image. I would just drag the face of the coin onto the canvas and put it at 0, 0. Then I would go to the midway point of the animation, and I would scale it so that, in the X scale, so that it were extremely thin. Something like that. And because the animation by default is set to rotate, now we have the rotating coin. Now if we want the coin to be paper thin but display both faces, the 2 different faces, things get a little more tricky because we basically have to double the overall length of the animation, because we not only need to start with one face showing, go to a perfect side view. At this point, we need to switch to the other image to reveal the second face, but then we have to go back to the initial face. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this over for now, and I'm going to Ctrl-Shift-C to copy that initial keyframe and then paste it. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this keyframe, Ctrl-Shift-C, and go over here and paste it. So now that this animation is sort of doubled, we're going to do the actual switching at this point. So now we're going to start revealing the other face, and because Spriter has that feature built in of switching images, it can be very simple in this case, where we just, because it's so thin, it might be hard to select on the canvas, but you can select it in the Z order, and then make sure, as I said, that it's set to 0.5, 0.5 on the default pivot point, and then just right click, and you'll see in the Z order, since you can't really tell here, that it's switched to the new image. So now it shows the face, and then it starts to reveal the back, and now it's going to pop back to the face here, because we need to also change it on this frame. So there we go. So now it starts on the face, it goes sideways, reveals the other face, and then it starts to go back, and it's already set at this frame back to the face, which is exactly what we need. and it loops back. So now if I play the animation, of course it's going to be going twice as fast, but the point is it's showing both faces of the coin rotating the way it belongs. And we could always stretch back out the time by clicking stretch keys here and changing this to 2000, apply length. So now the animation plays at the same speed of what it was before, but now actually rotating to reveal the front and the back of the coin. But of course it's still paper thin. So I'm going to create a new animation to start from scratch. Call it 3D coin and make sure I'm at timeline 0, which I am. And in this case, since it's a lot more sophisticated, we're not going to be doing it with just one sprite and one image. So what we need to do is set up our first keyframe to have sort of the components in it that we're going to need for the entire animation. And in this case, let's start with the coin side. Let's make sure it's at 0.5, 0.5. Getting that checked. Okay, and I'm going to click and drag this onto the canvas, and for all of the parts, or the most important parts here, I want to make sure they're at 0, 0 on this keyframe. And then we're going to start with the coin face. So I'm going to make sure that's at 0.5, 0.5. And I'm going to drag that on as well, and make sure that's at 0, 0. So just as we did with the sort of proof of concept paper thin version, the first thing we need to do is rotate the face of the coin to be paper thin. So I'm just going to select that, and then in the X scale, I'm going to change this to 0.01, press enter, and then you can see, now that we have this coin side image behind it, you can see that there's a problem when it rotates. Because the face of the coin does not move, it's sort of fighting with what's supposed to be the thickness of the coin. So what we need to do is move this paper thin coin face image. We need to move it over so that it is exactly lined up with this edge of the side view here at the second keyframe. So I'm going to carefully click on it to select it, and just use the arrow keys to nudge it over, and of course I can zoom in to make sure I'm lined up as well as I need to be. And I didn't go over quite far enough, there we go. And now you'll see, when I rotate it, and at least by the time it reaches that end frame, we have the depth of the coin that we need. So what needs to happen now? We have the face of the coin rotating and adjusting properly to the thickness of the coin by the time it reaches the perfect side view. But what needs to happen now? As you'll recall, if the coin has two different looking faces, what needs to happen at this point is the other face, the back side of the coin, has to appear here on this edge and has to rotate out to fully reveal itself. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to this second frame here, this keyframe, that's the perfect side view, and we're going to make sure the back of the coin is at 0.5, which it is, and we're going to drag that out. Okay, and we're going to make sure its Y position is definitely at 0, and then we're going to change its X scale to be paper thin again, 0.01, and we need to make sure it's lined up as carefully as possible with the edge of the coin, like so. So now we have this new object that does not exist, as you can see, until that keyframe, and then it appears there, which is fine. We don't need that object at those other points. But now we have this new object, so if we go further, okay, I'm going to turn off this looping for now, okay, so that we don't have this other face sort of fighting with us as we animate this new side. So I'm going to go to about here on the timeline, and now what we need to happen is for this new coin back face to become fully revealed. So we're going to set its X position to perfect center 0, and we're going to change its X scale to full 1%. Okay, so now you'll see we have this going on where the original face is revealed and moves to the right hand side of the screen as it shrinks away. Then you have the perfect side view of the coin. And then the other side of the coin starts to reveal itself and then becomes perfectly face on. So what we need to do now, obviously, now that this back face of the coin is facing forward, the next step in the animation is to make this face rotate to the right side of the screen just as this initial face did. So I'm going to go here on the timeline, select that back face, and then change its X scale to 0.01. So you can see now that I rotated this back face, and, or I should say by rotate I mean I squished it in the X to be paper thin, we can see that we still have, from the previous frames, we still have the actual front face of the coin here on this right edge, which we don't need at this point. By this point we want this back face to be at the right edge. So thanks to Spriter being flexible enough to allow a different number of images or sprites to be used per frame, we can actually delete it at this keyframe just to get it out of the way, and then select the back face and move it to the right edge of the coin and zoom in so that we can get this as accurately as possible. So now you'll see we start at the front face, it rotates to the right side, then we see the back face and it rotates to the right side. And you can even see here by this point, as soon as we reach this perfect side view, this is the point where we really, after this point, we no longer need that right hand side of this face here. We no longer need it on this side. So I'm actually going to delete it here as well. So here we go. So we have front face, rotates to side view, and then the back face rotates to forward facing and then to the other side. So what needs to happen now? We've gone from here to here to here to here. Now we need to go back to the beginning again. Okay, we need to go from the side to the front face of the coin, rotating back to the front. And we want it to be tweened, of course, so it needs to be this actual object. So if you'll notice, currently on this frame, we don't have the actual front face of the coin in the frame. And if we just dragged it here like this, okay, and I'm just going to do this quickly to demonstrate. As far as Spriter is concerned, because we dragged it from the file palette and not from the objects palette, Spriter made this a new object, so it won't actually tween. I'm going to turn the loop back on, okay, the loop mode for the animation. And you'll see Spriter does not tween that face of the coin back to this face of the coin. So what we needed to do, we don't drag it from the file palette. One really quick way is to just go to a frame that definitely has the object, press Ctrl C to copy, and then go back to the frame we need it on and press Ctrl V, and that makes sure it's actually the same object, and it makes sure that it even puts it in the same exact position. So we know at this frame we need it to be paper thin, 0.01 for the X scale, and we then need to carefully position it. Good enough for the sake of the demo. Let's see, there we go. And this will tween now because, there we go, and this will tween because Spriter knows it's the same object. So you'll see we're at a point where everything as far as the faces is concerned is looking right until we get up to this point, once the loop is turned back on, where we can see the paper thin back face trying to tween back to the center point where it starts at this first keyframe. So a simple solution for this sort of thing in this case is to simply go to the keyframe where it would start moving, since it's not needed anymore. And we can simply, that's the coin face there, we can simply change its Z order so it's behind the other object. So there it is. Now you can't see it until it gets to its destination. There we go. So now everything looks the way it belongs, except obviously there's currently no, during all of these tween bits, there's no proper curved depth to the coin. So that's the last step we're going to do. And that's where this image comes in, which is the coin sides, coin A sides in my case. And you make sure it's 0.5, 0.5. And you make sure you're at the 0 point, or the first keyframe of the timeline. And I'm just going to drag this out here. And I'm going to make sure its Y is at 0. And its X, 0 might not be exactly what we need. We want to line it up. I use the arrow keys. Line it up so the actual contour on the left-hand side is perfectly matched up with the contour of the face of the coin. And then I'm going to change its Z order so it's directly under the face. Okay, so now you'll start to see the effect we're after, but obviously it's not animated yet, and it does not yet exist in any of the other keyframes, so it won't tween. So what we need to do next is I'm going to select it, press Ctrl C, go to the next keyframe with the number 2 key, and then Ctrl V. That gives us this shape back, and we're going to drag it down below the faces in the timeline so that we can see more easily what is supposed to be happening. And so this side image needs to not only be moving, but needs to be compressing as we get toward this perfect side view. So I'm going to go to the perfect side view, and I'm going to compress this image to very, very thin as well, something like this, and move it to blend in with the side. And remember, it'll blend perfectly because of how carefully we created the images. So now you'll see when I rotate the coin, we get this depth effect. Okay, but it's not perfect yet. What we need to do is go sort of to the halfway point between the two and nudge this out a bit so the coin doesn't get too thin as it rotates around. So you see that looks about right. Now here's another cool thing about Spriter. Because every keyframe can have its own different number of objects and you can use the same images but as separate objects, we don't need to worry about this coin sides image when we want to start using it for this other side. If we drag it in from the file palette, we'll be creating an entirely new sprite, an entirely new object that's independent of the other one. So I'm going to just click and drag that out onto the screen like I did before. And in this case, I'm going to change its X scale for now to -1 to reverse it. Okay, and then I'm going to shrink it down to near paper thin, move it to the side of the coin, and make sure its Y is exactly 0. There we go, can't even see it anymore. And let's make sure that its Z order is behind the two faces as well. And if you click on it, you'll see that's the one that's going to be handling the this transition to this other side. So now what we need to do, now that we have it selected, is Ctrl C, and then go to the next frame with the 2 key and Ctrl V to get it where it needs to be. Okay, to get it in this new frame, we're going to select it, and we're going to make its X scale. Remember, it's a flipped version, so that's -1. And then we're just going to click on it and use the arrow keys to line up its edges perfectly with the contour of the coin on that side. And then we're going to click and drag its Z order again to be behind the two faces. So now we have the same exact idea going with this side, and you can see there's a Z order issue now with with this line showing up again, which is actually the coin face. So because we want that in the back, we're going to start at this frame, and we're just going to move that all the way to the back. There we go. So now we don't see that. And again, at the halfway point between these two frames, we need to select this coin sides and bring it out a little bit so it maintains more appropriate thickness as it rotates through. There we go, that looks better. So we're getting there. So we have all the way to this point is looking correct. We just need to do the same thing again for the other side. So now that this coin sign sprite is no longer needed for that side, once this rotation is done, I'm going to go just past that keyframe and select it. Make sure I'm selecting the right thing, coin size, and delete it. So now you'll see it disappears when we need it to, and at that same moment, in fact, it would be good to, I'm using the 1 and 2 key to go back and forth between these two keyframes that are very near each other. We need to have the same thing going on this side again. So I'm just going to click and drag from the file palette so that it's its own thing, so I don't need to worry about it trying to tween with other coin sides we used before. So I'm going to drag it out onto this keyframe and then put it in proper Z order, and then select it and make sure with the arrow keys that it is properly lined up with the edge of the coin. So there it is. And then of course we need to Control C, go to the next keyframe, Control V, and again we need to make this extremely thin and move it over so it blends in with the side. And something is misaligned, so I'm just going to select it and look. Yes, the Y should be perfectly 0. And I'm going to make sure at this keyframe also the Y is perfectly at 0. So now we basically have this keyframe right near the other keyframe that removes the things we don't need and adds the new things that we do need, and then they tween properly back to where it belongs. And so now we just go to the halfway point again, click on this, and drag it over a bit so that it gives the coin the coin maintains the proper thickness as it rotates. And now we've just got that Z order issue again, where the face should be, the face that's not being displayed should be behind everything else. So we're just going to go to those keyframes and move the thing that's in back. There we go. So we're looking good up until this point. And now we're back the way it belongs, except now, at this point, this should be at the front again, and the other face at this point should be behind everything. There we go. So to get that last bit of depth, the illusion of depth in the tween from the last frame to the first, we're going to go to that last frame, and we're going to grab that image, coin A sides in this case, drag it onto the canvas, make sure it's 0, it's Y I should say, coordinate is 0, and then in this case we need a negative, we need it flipped in the X scale, and then what we're going to do is make it extremely thin. There we go. And move that over to something like that, and then Control C to copy it because we need it here too. And in this case, we're going to move it under the faces. There it is. And we're going to make its X scale -1. And then use the arrow keys it out a little bit because it's going to be hard for me to grab. There we go. And we want it lined up exactly with the contour of the face. And now it should tween, which it does perfectly. So now the only issue obviously is the Z order. Now all we need to do is make sure the Z order issue is taken care of by making sure this is behind, there we go, the face. And then at the halfway point, click here, drag over a couple of pixels so that it maintains proper thickness as we go back to the first frame. Now we're super close to finished, but as you can see there's an issue now where once it gets where it needs to be, this coin side image, there's nothing to get rid of it so that it's basically there when it shouldn't be until the next keyframe lets Spriter know that that thing no longer exists. So what we need to do is come extremely close to the first keyframe on the timeline, for instance 2 milliseconds in, select that object and delete it, so now it can't cause trouble because it no longer exists once past the point where it's needed. So here we go, rotating 3D coin using very few images, and that's how it's done. And here's our 3D rotating coin. I hope it was useful information, and thank you very much for watching.